Greetings, this is Eugene the philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. So many a time on this channel we've talked about like scientific epistemology, gnoseology, things like that, like how is the scientific knowledge produced and managed, etc., etc. But in this case, in this video, I wish to talk about like almost a perpendicular method, you might say, to a scientific method. In particular, like I'll mention the key differences a little bit later when we'll describe the first method, the one we're gonna focus on in this video. So I would call this method like magical method or simply magic, right? So we have scientific method and a magical method. So here we're talking about magical method mostly. So it relies on magic, and that is, for the sake of this video at the very least, is a magical unknown force that for some reason produces a certain result. So in some sense, you might say we put something in this magical, black box, hence the title of this video, and we get some result as the output, right? So we have an input and the output which differ. And in the middle we have this black box of a black magical box, and we don't know what's in the box, we don't know how it works, we just know it does this. It does something that produces this output with this input, right? But we don't know what exactly it does, or rather how it does this, right? We only know the result. So this is ultimately the magical system, if you like. Again, for the sake of this video at least, the terminology is such. So what is in the box is never, is just taken for granted. It's never investigated, right? What exactly is happening. So, and all the internal mechanics is unknown, or are unknown. I'm not sure if it's plural. Whatever. Like, again, like in regular magic, if you know what I mean, like in fantasy fiction, etc. Like reading a spell from a book produces a fireball. So we have an input of reading a spell and we have an output of a fireball, but we have no idea how the fireball is produced actually, right? Because it like violates everything that we know. But somehow it works, and like because magic, you know. So this black box of magic is in between the input and the output, and this is exactly the pattern that we're discussing here, right? Okay, so we put stuff in the box, we shake the box, we get stuff out of it, in some sense the answer to all of our questions is the existence of the box itself. We say, well, why is the fireball produced? Because there is magic in the world, right? Maybe there is a god of magic, but what exactly this god does, how does he or she works, or z, you know, they, whatever works, remains a mystery, basically, right? Whereas, and here we're returning to the introduction where I've mentioned that I will describe the difference between scientific and magical systems. So, whereas in scientific discourse, in scientific approach, actually it would be like the very first question we would have asked, right? What's inside the box? Let's examine the box. So this is what science is mostly interested in. We see the input, we see the output. So magic says that's enough, the box is the answer, whereas science says, no, the box is the question actually, right? We need to examine how it works, we need to try to look inside. So, and this is ultimately well, I've already stated in one of my videos that it's actually, science is based on if-then type of structure. So in some sense, science itself produces these black boxes, right? So if you have certain conditions, then you would have certain outcomes. Like, let's say, if you have this value of energy, you would have the same value of energy in the end because energy is conserved. So black box is the law of conservation of energy. But in some sense, like here we're talking about like some level of detailization, I guess. So on some level, indeed, we have those impenetrable black boxes such as the conservation of energy, but on larger level, we may examine systems with the use of these smaller black boxes, right? With these pixels, if you like, pixels of science, like theories, like statements, axioms, things like that. But otherwise, we would like to look into any phenomenon like that, right? Okay. So it was a bit controversial what I just said. I mean, a bit complex, I guess, but ultimately it's very simple what I just said. Hopefully it's easy to understand. Okay, so yeah, so basically magic says the box is the answer, science says no, let's look in the box, right? This is the difference. And again, the purpose of this video is to introduce, I guess, the very idea of this magical, non-scientific magical thinking, if you like, right? As illustrated by this problem of a black box, if you like. So a good example, and perhaps like knowing my viewer base, based, so to speak, a good example would be familiar to many of you, would be plasma. Plasma in various electric universe theories and plasma cosmology theories, or plasma universe if you wish, because I think that in many cases, if not in most cases actually, in electric universe discourse or plasma universe discourse, plasma itself serves as a black box of this sort, exactly as I've described above. Plasma itself works as a magical tool of doing whatever, like producing whatever output from whatever input. Namely, and it works in a magical way again, in an unexplained way. Perhaps a better way of describing it would be, well, at least in this case, will not be using the analogy of a box, but by using the analogy of a secret ingredient, like in cooking or whatever. So you just add this secret thing that we don't know what it does, what it is, and how it works, but if you add it, something would happen, right? So it's kind of the idea of a black box, but sort of inverted geometrically. Like, you don't put stuff in the box, but you put kind of the box in the stuff, if you know what I mean. Like, you add the ingredient to an already existing system, right? Something like that. And plasma in this case works as this secret ingredient, secret magical, again, I don't know, bean, right? Or whatever, like what does people use, like in fairy tales, I don't know. Well, beans is the only thing I can remember. Like secret powder, like fairy dust or something like that, right? So you add plasma to planets, you get craters, you get valleys and mountains, you get continents and their motion, you get expanding planets, shrinking planets, you get planets turned into planets from stars, you get, I don't know, stars lighting up from inert bodies through plasma again. You get I don't know, stars being powered by plasma, stars being plasma themselves, plasma influencing rotation of galaxies, galaxies themselves being plasma, plasma influencing the shapes of riverbeds, plasma influencing orbits of planets, plasma influencing, I don't know, whatever. So whatever the problem you have, you just insert plasma in it, and wow, like everything's electric, everything is whatever, connected. I'll mention this notion a little bit later. Everything is connected. But like what I'm saying here is, we don't know. I mean, all of that I've listed is like, most of it is I've listed in sarcastic way. You have to understand. I don't really think that it is how it works. I just kind of quoted almost literally what people say, people in electric universe community say. So like when they say, oh, the volcano eruptions are connected to the solar activity and it's electric. And like when you try to examine like what exactly they mean, like what, how, well, they may occasionally mention that there is a plasma, like it's this secret ingredient, but we don't know how it works ultimately. Like if you try to examine what exactly they mean, like how exactly it's supposed to work, so you're asking these scientific questions, you're trying to get into this black box of plasma, well, unfortunately you find nothing in there, right? So they cannot explain anything. You just have to believe that it's magic and it works. Like if you add plasma to this system, like if you focus on plasma as an actor, you get the act being done. Therefore, I mean, the sun influencing volcanic eruptions, right? You just have to notice that there is plasma acting here in its own magical way, as usual. So this is roughly what I mean. And so, again, plasma, you have, I don't know, what other magical properties plasma has? Well, it certainly, it can produce like disinfection, right? Well, it actually does this, but it does this in a magical way, so we don't know how it does this. Then it influences chemistry, of course, like electrochemistry, again, electric comet, etc. So it's a magical ingredient as well in this case. Then it produces elemental transmutations, again, Sapphire project, Satire project, you know, or like this Eleanor field, etc., etc. So ultimately, yeah, plasma is this secret ingredient that you can add everywhere and it would work everywhere and turn everything into a magical everything, right? So you have like a piece of cheese, you want to make it like an ultra super cool cheese with very healthy beneficial properties, so you blast it with plasma and there you go, you have like this fantastic magical cheese now that was blasted by magical plasma. Right? So, or you see a person with mental health issue, like, I don't know, paranoia or whatever. So you blast this person with a beam of high energy plasma and they are cured, suddenly, right? Or you observe that your economy is in a slump. So you see, how do we fix it? Well, we should like irradiate the whole country with plasma because, well, the experiments of Russians on the ISS have shown that the dusty plasma, as we all know, forms the spiral DNA pattern, again, in its own magical way. So, like economy is produced by people have DNA. Therefore, by the law of similarity, if we blast the whole country with a high energy plasma, then the people would be affected, like the DNA would be affected, therefore the economy might grow, right? Well, it makes sense, but this is exactly like the magical thinking that I'm talking about. Like, the similarity is, by the way, a very important aspect for magical thinking. Like, this is the thing that like, I'm not sure if I was the author of the idea or it was Michel Foucault, but I had the idea when I read him. Or I think I've had, like, it was his idea that I've read from him, which also might be the case. From Les mots et les choses, his book, The Words and Things, which was, I think, translated like The Order of Things, or something like that, in English. So, in one of the sections of the book, he describes the tertiary versus binary system of recognition of symbols. So he goes kind of into a very deep and very abstract generalizations about culture, but roughly speaking, what he says is that before modernity, before this, well, roughly beginning/middle of the 17th century, there was different way that people operated with symbolic systems. And in particular in language, what it meant that, like, when people wrote essays about things, they were kind of mixing all kinds of stuff together through the law of similarity. Whereas in modernity, people started analyzing things, so they tried to divide one problem from another and not mix everything together. So in a very rough sense, that's what he talks about there. But like in particular, he talks about like snakes, for example. I think so, or it may be my own like hallucination, but I think I read it there, that like imagine a Renaissance essay, even though technically essays only appeared in like very late Renaissance, I mean Michel Montaigne, etc., but like the end of the 16th century, or at least the middle, but whatever. The essays of this time was like, if it was about snakes, you would see all kinds of stuff about imaginary snakes in like heraldry symbols, like in coat of arms, etc. Snakes in the Bible, snakes in everywhere, and it's all just piled together like into a single essay, right? Whereas in modernity, if people wrote about snakes, they would either write about like snakes in heraldry, for example, or like snakes as an animal, right? And they wouldn't like mix it with all other instances of snakehood, so to speak, in the universe, both the real and fictional universe, right? So this is what I'm talking about, and I don't know how I got into this digression, but whatever. Yeah, I was talking about the law of similarity, but for what reason? Oh, yeah, from my own stupid example of the plasma and GDP and whatever. Okay, so, but yeah, I guess one thing I wanted to note is that magic relies heavily on pattern recognition and similarity in patterns, right? So this is, by the way, one other sin, I would say, sin in epistemological, gnoseological sense that many alternative thinkers make, is that they assume that the similarity of pattern means the same reason, basically, right? The same like physical mechanism of production, of appearance, creation. Whereas this is not guaranteed. You may see the same pattern appearing from different sources. Like, it is an axiom, right, that the same pattern would be produced by the same source, but it's an axiom, it's not a guarantee, right? It's a postulate that we make, and yeah, it may not be correct, right? But it's a very characteristic pattern of magical thinking. Again, think about how people try to like make like love potions or whatever, like if you want to curse someone, what do you need always? Like almost like, I don't know, 99% of cases, you need a part of this person, like, right? At the very least, you need a photograph of the person. So you need to get closer to them somehow. Like the absolute best is if you have like a part of their body, like their fingernail or a hair or something like that, right? And then you can, through this part, access the whole person, right? Or think about, so this is the law of similarity, right? This is our loophole into the person's body, so we can harm the body by manipulating this thing, right? Or think about the voodoo, these dolls or whatever. It's also the similarity of the doll and the person, right? So this is how magic works, supposedly. All right. Whereas, again, science would have tried to actually distinguish, like, acting forces, right? Distinguish facts and fiction, if you like. Of course, this is all in a very, very naive understanding, right? Yes. What else did I want to say with regards to this? I guess you may call it like analysis versus synthesis type of situation. So science is about analysis, and what does it mean? Well, it literally means like division into parts, right? So whereas synthesis means like collecting everything together, like synthesizing a larger thing from smaller things. So analysis says, okay, we have a phenomenon, let's divide it into parts, see which parts are important and which are not, and therefore we probably can conclude that important parts, well, kind of by definition, are the things that make the whole phenomenon going, and smaller parts are probably not so important, and therefore we may try to derive some physical law or whatever where we connect the important part to the phenomenon, right? But without this initial division into parts, we could not even make this operation in the first place. Whereas the synthesis would say, hey, let's just pile everything together and be happy with it. And this is kind of a magical approach, right? So we have plasma, we have geology, let's make it plasma geology. You know, this is synthesis, this is magical thinking. Sort of like that. Yeah, so everything is connected. So magical thinking would say, yes, everything is connected. Therefore, like Andromeda galaxy influences your behavior. Therefore, you need to, I don't know, make a prayer to Andromeda galaxy, or cast a spell that is like supposedly enchanted by Andromeda galaxy's spirit or whatever. Because we are connected, right? And it influences everything. Whereas science would actually ask, well, how, like, firstly, the first question we need to ask is, how exactly is everything connected? Well, in this particular case, Andromeda galaxy, let's say, with us or whatever we're studying. First question is, how exactly are we connected? And the second question, which is kind of connected to the first, to what degree are we connected? Is it relevant? Like, we analyze our problem and we have Andromeda galaxy present in it, right? But we are asking, well, is it big? Is it big enough to be relevant in this problem? Maybe it's very small and like negligible. Maybe we should ignore it because it's not a factor, right? In what we are studying. So like we're studying, I don't know, sales of a truck of a certain make in a certain year versus another year. So we may say, well, Andromeda galaxy may have influenced it somehow. It may have influenced it somehow. The question is how and by how much, right? So probably, well, it did influence it somehow, but probably like compared to everything else in the universe, at the very least on this planet, it was a very small contribution, you know? So therefore we might ignore it. So yeah. So ultimately those two questions, like how exactly and to which degree it influences, feed into the most important question: does it matter? Does this influence matter for our particular problem? So you can answer this question through synthesis, but through analysis, I'm sorry. Again, utilizing all these usual scientific procedures in a scientific paradigm at the very least. But in a synthetic approach, you cannot answer this question. You would ultimately, you may state that everything matters to a large degree, and therefore, like, well, think about it in this way. Like, if you have a pantheon of like an infinite amount of gods, like all of them are pretty strong. So you should actually try to please all of the gods in the universe, or you'll be screwed. Right, well, you will be screwed, which I guess may serve as an evidence for infinite amount of gods. I don't know. You get the idea. Like, if you like are stuck in magical thinking, there are evil spirits everywhere, and well, you're screwed basically. Like, I don't even know what you need to do in order to survive, so to speak. Mentally, at least. Retain some degree of mental health, but whatever. Okay, so I guess we're finished with this point about black boxes and magic. I'll repeat the main points at the very end and conclusions. But here, another thing I wanted to talk about in this video, which is somehow a little bit connected. is divination. So why do I call it oracles and black boxes? Well, it's because of divination. Ultimately, I would say that, again, divination is kind of a magical process of its own, as you might understand, right? And here's the key statement, which you would easily understand remembering what I've talked about previously. And the statement is such: any oracle works as a black box of its own, right? So oracles are a subtype, a subset, if you like, of black boxes. Namely, black boxes which are used to divine future, to foresee future, or whatever. Or, make any sort of prognosis, like forecast or whatever. So ultimately, it's a magical tool. But not everything that is used to forecast future is magical, right? There are scientific oracles, so to speak, scientific means to forecast future. Like, again, if you assemble a scientific black box, but here again we encounter this problem that I mentioned before, that science itself produces black boxes. So it's not as black and white, like science does not use black boxes. It does actually use them, right? But in a naive point of view, we're saying that no, science actually dismantles all the black boxes and looks inside to like the very bottommost level, right? And science has its own tools of forecasting, which does not rely on any magic and any black boxes. All right. Whereas Oracle is a black box of its own. And it's a magical tool, ultimately, which relies on some unknown method, but which gives you, hopefully, some picture of the future that you can work with. Therefore, it is magical, right? Because it's unknown how it does so. So my own idea of how it works, like practically falsifiable at the very least, or like practically relevant, I would say, although that might sound kind of arrogant, but whatever. My own idea of how divination works in reality, if you like, is that, well, we have a chaotic or a complex signal, which is what our oracle does or shows, at least initially. And we analyze this signal that we're given from our oracle. And in this analysis, we only receive what we are able to receive or perceive or discern, if you like. Even this Greek Pythia or whatever, Delphi oracle, she or they or whatever, they had interpreters, right? So, who received the initial message and translated it, right, into something discernible, perceivable, messageable. I don't know. How else can you put it? Repeatable, I don't know. Relatable, whatever. You see, I'm having my own problems with discernment of what I'm trying to say. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that so in reality, how oracles work, we have some chaotic signal which is then analyzed by whoever, some agent, and this agent can only discern certain parts of this chaotic message. Therefore, he recognizes, she or they, whatever, recognizes pattern because he can only see patterns. He cannot digest chaos, pure chaos, right? So, but almost by definition, there would be some pattern in the signal. So he recognizes this pattern, and this pattern is then treated as the prediction of an oracle, right? So, how do you call it? Like when you divine on a coffee, whatever, remnants of your coffee basically in your cup. So it's chaotic, right? But you can see some patterns in it because, well, you are looking for patterns at the very least, right? for that reason or another. And therefore, when you recognize some pattern, you are then try to connect it to whatever question you were thinking about, you were asking or whatever about the future, and thus you may try to get a certain concept of the future that you can work with. Something like that. It was kind of more complex than I actually thought it would be. Like, in my mind, it was a very simple explanation, but I can see now that it's not so simple, perhaps. Anyways, the idea that I was trying to convey was that a chaotic signal being processed through interpreter's eyes becomes not so chaotic. That's like pretty much it. That's the whole process. But, or rather, therefore, any complex or chaotic process might serve as an oracle. Because exactly for this reason that the receptor, the detector, the analyst would anyway not be able to process the whole complex signal. They would only receive a certain recognizable pattern from it, right? So any signal which is rich enough to contain some patterns may be used as an oracle. That's what I'm saying, ultimately, right? Because some patterns would be found in it by the analyst, by the whoever is trying to make the divination happen. Okay, and so you can see it in it. So in some sense, divination is actually almost like a tool of psychology or even like medicine. It's a diagnostic tool of the diviner, of this person, analyst, who is working with this signal, because, well, they only perceive in this chaotic signal what they care about, right? And thus it may serve as a probe into their own like personality, to their own psychology, because thus we can understand what they care about. So, and it's easily seen in obsessions, like when people are obsessed with something, they tend to notice it everywhere around them in the world, whereas other people don't even notice it at all, right? At least they don't focus on it. Like some people are too obsessed with money, some people are too obsessed with sex, some people are too obsessed with food, and they see it everywhere, like one of those things or any other things or whatever. Whereas other people are not concerned with those things and they are not focusing on them and they just happily live their lives, right? So it's the same with this divination. Like if you are very concerned with some issue, you will try to connect any sort of pattern you can recognize in any sort of chaotic signal to your issue, right? And therefore, well, get some sort of prediction of the future. Okay. Like you might think about it, think about the phenomenon, like when you return from some concert of any sort of music, or just if you listen to a lot of certain type of music, like I've noticed this. I actually think it's true for any type of music. Like if you listen a lot of it, then let's say if you're going on a subway, like returning home from a concert on a subway, or you're in the shower and you turn the water on, like this noise, almost like white noise of the subway or the water in your shower, you would hear this music in it. Well, not necessarily this music that you've heard on a concert, but it would be something alike, right? It would be some like combinations of notes, some weird like semi-chaotic musical tapestry, right? In this white noise. So this is exactly what I was talking about. You have a chaotic signal, this white noise, and you discern these recognizable patterns in it, right? So maybe like roughly speaking, like mechanistically speaking, those neurons that are responsible for processing exactly those sounds, they are still sort of a little bit agitated, or how do you say it in English? Excited, I guess. So they kind of keep firing again and again, even responding to this white noise. So white noise sounds like music to you again, like the music you just heard, because these neurons are still operating, so to speak. They still have not resetted themselves, or whatever. That's just a hypothesis I produced out of the blue, but the pattern is there. I was mainly talking about the general pattern of recognition of patterns in a chaotic signal. So, well, I guess that would be like a general oracle. You might call it Eugene's oracle or whatever. It would be just a white noise. And you just put a person to this white noise and like, well, they're supposed to ask their question to this white noise and find the pattern in the white noise, and they will find it, like most likely. Like if you kind of would be able to sell it to them as some sort of magical oracle, like if it wouldn't be just, you know, a TV with, you know, this white noisy thing, but you would be able to convince the person that it's some sort of magical TV, you know, some sort of enchanted TV that Buddha himself used, whatever, you know, then yeah, maybe the person would most likely be able to find an answer to their question, or at least like something, you know. Okay, so I think that's enough. I've probably talked enough about this. So to conclude this part, I would say that any phenomenon, any complex phenomenon, may be used for divination, right? If it is, and it probably is, if it's complex by definition, if it is rich enough to contain, you know, enough patterns to be recognized by the diviner, if that's the word. Okay. And it becomes apparent from this why people tend to use like any sort of drugs or any sort of like chaotic stuff, if you like, to enhance their divination capabilities. Well, exactly because the use of drugs, for example, increases randomness, right? It shifts the accents in your perception, and therefore you may notice other patterns, the ones you wouldn't have been able to notice before, right? So this is the general idea of how all these amazing insights from mushrooms or whatever works, right? It's just your perception is very significantly altered. So even if you are in a regular situation, you're sitting in your room, let's say, still your perception is altered to such a degree that you notice completely different patterns in like your internal feeling or in external world, and therefore it can be used for divination as well, because, well, again, you will get a completely different answer to your question. Maybe you will even ask a completely different question in the first place, right? It's not guaranteed that you'll remember the question, or at least like ask it as it was intended when you were sober, so to speak, right? Etc., etc. Well, probably one last thing I would like to mention with respect to divination issue is that modern quasi-scientific, that I can't even call it scientific, but rather quasi-scientific discourse utilizes many tools which are very similar to what I just described, to these sort of semi-magical divination tools. And I would include in this list computer simulations, like when you have, again, some, let's say, nonlinear system of equations, which may not even be exact in the first place, like it's some approximate equations, etc. You numerically solve these equations and you get all kinds of stuff, right? And again, problem with nonlinear equations is that like you shift the input a little bit, and with enough iterations you get like infinitely different result, right? So you can get, roughly speaking, anything from a numerical simulation if you try hard enough, all right? Yeah. So therefore, numerical simulation itself is an oracle, if you like, of exactly this sort. It's like the computer with sets of equations is perceived as, or well, maybe the computer with sets of procedures that are used to solve the equations and like numerically calculate the results is a magical black box which works as an oracle. It's exactly that. Like, there's absolutely no difference. It's like a cup with a remnant of coffee in this case, right? In the full sense of the word. Neural networks would be another example that is frequently used today. Like, again, it's all about pattern recognition inherently in neural networks, right? You train neural networks to see dog faces everywhere, it would see dog faces everywhere, right? So there you go. This is probably, yeah, it's a good model of how divination itself works. Like, if you are obsessed with dog faces, you will see them everywhere. And again, we can even train the computer to do that, right? So it's no wonder that people can do that as well and actually do that as well in real life. I actually remember a brilliant idea of Colttaine, how, well, it's not a gender-friendly idea, but that how women are more prone to risk just due to basic biology, etc., etc. See my video Understanding Gender for more details. So therefore women perceive risk in a more elevated way. Therefore women tend to look for, like, notice risk a lot more, and therefore we have all these problems, how women are oppressed here and there and everywhere, right? It's the same analog of dog faces. Like, if you're focused on something, you will see it everywhere. Okay. Yeah. I guess to conclude this video, what did I talk about? Well, I talked about the difference between the scientific approach, if you like, and the magical approach, so to speak. So, magical approach, roughly speaking, is such. We have a black box that we don't know how it works, what is the internal mechanisms at work, etc., etc. We put something into this box and we get the result. And we just take for granted that this black box, this magical thing, works in this way, like it produces this from that, right? And that's it. Or an inverted situation would be when the black box itself is added to something as a secret ingredient, as I've described it. So you have a system, you add a little bit of this fairy magical dust to it, your secret magical ingredient, and the system turns into something else, right? But we don't know how it works, why it does so, etc. It's all in this magical thingy that we add to it. And I've given you an example of such black box or a secret ingredient is plasma in electric universe theories. Okay. Yeah. That's pretty much it. That was the first part. And in the second part, we talked about the divination and oracles. And my point was that an oracle is a black box, just as we've described in the first part, which is used to, again, to get some forecast about the future, right? To predict the future, if you like. So we also, just like any black box, we don't know how it works, we don't know what's inside of it, etc., etc. But, well, we use it anyways. And my own idea of how it works is that we have some complex signal, some, roughly speaking, chaotic set of variables, and whoever wants to receive divination perceives this and forms a pattern from it and uses it as the result of the divination act, right? As the answer of an oracle, so to speak. And that's how divination works. And therefore, any complex pattern, any complex phenomenon may be used for divination. Right? Because it would be rich enough for you to see the pattern that you need, that you would like to see. I mean, whether they're beneficial or harmful for you, it doesn't matter in this case. Recognizable by you, I guess, would be a better way to put it. And as perhaps unexpected examples I've brought of divination, I've brought computer simulations or neural networks that are very popular today. Okay, I guess that would be all. Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.